All right, ready to dive in? Today we're tackling A Theology of Liberation by Gustavo Gutiérrez.
Ooh, this is a good one.
Yeah, it's not your typical theological text, that's for sure. You've got biblical analysis, you've got some really pointed social commentary,
Yeah.
and even personal reflections from Gutierrez himself, all kind of woven together
Right.
to explore how faith,
Right.
intersects with this fight for justice.
And I think it's really important to remember that this book
Mm-hmm.
emerged from a very specific context.
Yeah.
Latin America
Right?
in the mid-20th century.
Yeah.
So imagine, a continent grappling with
Yeah.
crushing poverty,
Yeah.
economic dependence on more powerful nations,
Uh-huh.
and this widening gap between the rich and the poor.
Yeah, Gutierrez doesn't shy away from the harsh realities. He uses some really stark language
Yeah.
to describe the plight of the poor,
Mm-hmm.
right? He talks about dominated peoples, exploited social classes, despised races, marginalized cultures.
And these aren't just, abstract terms.
Yeah.
These represent the lived reality of millions of people.
Yeah, and he's careful to point out that poverty isn't just about, a lack of money.
Right, exactly.
It's about being deprived of dignity,
Yeah.
of opportunity,
Mhm.
of a voice
Yeah,
in shaping one's own destiny,
absolutely. It's about being trapped
Yeah.
in a system that perpetuates this inequality and suffering.
And that's where Gutierrez's concept of liberation comes in.
Right.
He argues it's not a simple
Yeah.
one-dimensional idea.
Right.
It's a process
Uh-huh.
with multiple layers.
And it's a process, too, which, is ongoing. It's not something that's just achieved at one point and then we're done.
Right.
It's something that we constantly have to be striving towards.
Exactly.
And that's why I think his idea of the threefold liberation is so helpful.
Yeah. What are those three levels?
So he breaks it down like this.
Okay.
You have political liberation, which focuses on breaking free from these oppressive political and social structures.
Mhm.
Then you have human liberation, and this ongoing journey
Oh, yeah.
of becoming more fully human
Right.
throughout history.
Okay.
It's about taking control of our own destiny, both
Yeah.
individually and collectively.
Yeah.
And then finally you have liberation from sin,
Right.
which is that ultimate freedom
Yeah.
that we find in our relationship with God.
Okay, so I'm starting to see how these layers kind of intertwine, right?
Yeah.
So political liberation paves the way
Yeah.
for greater human flourishing.
Mm.
And ultimately, it's all part of this larger movement
Exactly.
towards communion with God.
And it really challenges us, I think, to rethink how we approach social justice.
Mm-hmm.
If we see political liberation
Right.
as a necessary step
Yeah.
towards spiritual wholeness, then our faith compels us
Yeah.
to engage
Right.
in the fight against oppressive systems.
It's not just about saving souls.
It's not.
It's about creating a world
Yeah.
where everyone can thrive,
Exactly.
both materially and
Mhm.
spiritually.
And Gutierrez really grounds this whole idea of liberation
Yeah.
in the Bible,
Yeah.
particularly in the Exodus story.
Right.
And he doesn't see it as just, an ancient tale of escape from slavery.
Yeah.
It becomes a blueprint, I think, for understanding God's role
Yeah.
in the liberation of oppressed people
Throughout history.
throughout history.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the Exodus is really this powerful metaphor
Yeah.
for any struggle against oppression. It's about this journey from slavery to freedom, from a place of suffering to a
Yeah.
promised land of
Okay.
justice and dignity.
Right, and what Gutierrez highlights is
Right,
that
yes.
God isn't some passive observer in this story.
Yeah.
He's an active force intervening in history
Yes.
to liberate his people.
And he even says, and this is a direct quote,
Yeah.
"The God of Exodus is the God of history and of political liberation more than the God of nature."
That's a pretty bold statement for a theologian.
It is.
Yeah.
And it challenges us to see God not as, this distant, detached deity,
Yeah, yeah.
but as a God who's deeply invested
Mm-hmm.
in the liberation of all people
Right.
from all forms of oppression.
Okay, so this kind of naturally leads us to Jesus
Mm-hmm.
and his relationship
Yeah.
to the political landscape of his time.
Right.
And this is where things get, well, maybe a little...
Controversial, yeah.
Was Jesus a political revolutionary?
Well, Gutierrez acknowledges that Jesus challenged the power structures
Mm-hmm.
of his day,
Mm-hmm.
but he stopped short of labeling him a zealot in the
Right.
strict sense.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Remember, the zealots were this Jewish group
Right.
that advocated for armed rebellion
Yes.
against Roman rule.
So while Jesus might have shared some of their concerns about Roman oppression,
Yeah.
he didn't endorse their methods
Exactly.
of violent resistance.
But he definitely wasn't afraid to ruffle some feathers.
Yeah, yeah. He wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo.
Exactly. Think about his confrontations with the Pharisees.
Yeah.
Constantly challenging their hypocrisy, their legalistic focus on outward rituals.
Right, right.
Reminding them that true faith is about compassion and justice.
Yeah.
And his clashes with the Sadducees, who represented both the religious and political establishment, were even more direct.
Yeah. He didn't shy away from calling them out for their complicity in a system that exploited the poor.
And so we see that Jesus wasn't just preaching some feel-good spirituality.
Right.
He was actively challenging the powers that be.
Yeah.
Even if he wasn't leading a political revolution
Yeah.
in the traditional sense.
So what about the church? What role does it play in all of this?
This is where Gutierrez gets really interesting.
Okay.
He critiques what he calls the Christendom mentality.
Okay.
And he argues that for centuries, the church has often acted as if it were separate from and even superior to the secular world.
Yeah.
More concerned with maintaining its own power and influence than with truly following in Jesus' footsteps.
So it's this idea that the church has like a monopoly on salvation.
Right.
And that its primary concern is getting people into heaven, even if it means, turning a blind eye to injustice in this world.
That's one way it manifests, yes.
Okay.
And Gutierrez argues that this Christendom mentality ultimately betrays the true mission of the church. He says, and I quote, "The church must cease considering itself as the exclusive place of salvation and orient itself towards a new and radical service of people."
So instead of clinging to power and privilege, the church should be a force for liberation, standing in solidarity with the oppressed and working to dismantle systems of injustice. That's a pretty radical departure from like business as usual.
It is.
Yeah.
And it requires a fundamental shift in how we understand the church's role in the world.
Yeah.
It's not just about saving souls.
Right.
It's about transforming society.
Yeah.
It's about making God's love and justice tangible in the here and now.
This raises a lot of questions, though.
It does.
What does this radical service of people actually look like in practice? How does the church move beyond just pronouncements to action?
Right.
And how do we as individuals reconcile our faith with the injustices we see all around us?
Yes, these are all important questions.
We'll dig into those questions as our deep dive continues.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about this radical shift that Gutierrez is calling for and how we understand the church's role.
Right.
But how does he see individual Christians participating in this movement?
Well, he places a lot of emphasis on what he calls praxis.
Okay.
This idea that true faith isn't just about believing the right things, but it's about putting those beliefs into action.
So it's that classic, like, faith without works is dead.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But Gutierrez, I think, takes it a step further. He's not just talking about, acts of charity.
Right.
He's calling for a fundamental transformation of society.
So he sees this struggle for liberation as like an integral part of what it means to be a Christian.
Absolutely. It's about working to dismantle these systems of oppression and creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to flourish.
Now, Gutierrez also dives into this concept of hope, which he sees as like essential fuel for this work.
Absolutely.
But he's not talking about, some kind of naive optimism or like wishful thinking.
It's a much more, I think, active, almost defiant kind of hope.
Right.
He draws on the work of theologians like Jürgen Moltmann, who saw hope as this revolutionary force that pushes us to challenge the status quo and work for a better future.
So it's not just hoping. It's not just hoping.
For a better future. It's about
It's about actively working to create it.
Right.
Yeah.
Which brings us to his concept of utopia. And I have to admit, when I first saw that word, I was a little surprised.
I can understand that.
Utopia, often gets kind of a bad rap. Conjured up these images of, unrealistic, unattainable fantasies.
But Gutierrez, I think, really reclaims this concept of utopia.
Okay.
Arguing that it's a necessary tool for imagining a better world.
Okay.
And he sees it as having two key aspects.
Okay.
Denunciation and enunciation.
So denunciation, I'm guessing, is about calling out the injustices of the present.
It's about naming those systems and structures that perpetuate suffering and oppression.
But it's not enough to just,
it's not
critique the way things are.
We also need enunciation.
Oh.
That vision of a more just and equitable future.
So it's this two-pronged approach.
Yes.
Critique and hope.
Yes.
We need to be honest about the problems, but we also need to offer this compelling vision of something better.
Right.
But all this talk about liberation and hope and utopia, it feels, I don't know, maybe a little abstract.
Yeah.
Does Gutierrez give any concrete examples?
Well, he doesn't, offer a step-by-step guide.
Right.
But he emphasizes the importance of becoming what he calls a historical subject.
Historical subject.
And it's about recognizing that we're not just passive bystanders in history.
Right.
We're active agents who can shape the course of events.
So it's about taking responsibility, for the world around us.
It is.
Not just focusing on our own personal salvation. It's about understanding that our individual actions, however small, can contribute to larger movements for social change.
And this kind of brings us back to the Eucharist. Gutierrez makes this I don't know, almost surprising connection between this, central act of Christian worship and this pursuit of social justice.
And it might seem surprising at first.
Yeah. How does he bridge that gap?
Well, he challenges the way we often view the Eucharist.
Okay.
It's not just about receiving the body and blood of Christ.
Yeah.
In this symbolic ritual. It's about participating in a community of shared resources and mutual care.
Right.
A community where no one is left behind.
So it's about taking that experience of communal sharing beyond the walls.
Beyond the walls.
Of the church and into the world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He says, and I'm quoting here, without a real commitment against exploitation and alienation, and for a society of solidarity and justice, the Eucharistic celebration is an empty action.
Wow.
So participating in the Eucharist should compel us to work for justice in the world, to dismantle those systems of exploitation, and to create a society where everyone has what they need to thrive.
This is really challenging the way, I think about the Eucharist.
It's not just a ritual.
Yeah, it's not just a ritual.
It's a call to action.
And that brings us to, I think, one of Gutierrez's most beautiful and challenging concepts, the sacrament of our neighbor. And he's suggesting that we encounter God, not just, in traditional religious settings, but in our interactions with other people.
Especially those who are marginalized and suffering.
It's like that quote that's attributed to Mother Teresa.
Right.
We see Jesus in disguise when we serve the poor.
Yeah.
But Gutierrez takes it, I think, even further.
Yeah, he does.
Suggesting that encountering someone in need can be a kind of sacrament.
Exactly.
Like a tangible experience of the divine.
He's really building on this biblical idea that we're all created in the image of God. Yeah. And that every human being has inherent dignity and worth.
Right.
And he's urging us to see the face of God in everyone. Yeah. Especially those who are often, overlooked and disregarded by society.
Yeah. That's a powerful image.
It is.
What does this sacrament of our neighbor look like in practice?
Well, he emphasizes the importance of listening. to the voices of those on the margins, of understanding their experiences, and of working alongside them to create a more just and equitable world.
So it's not about, like, imposing...
It's not about imposing...
our own solutions.
No, it's about walking with them and learning from their experiences.
Right.
It's about building those relationships of solidarity and working together to create change.
Right. And that, of course, requires
a deep well of hope.
Which brings us back to this idea of hope as a revolutionary force.
Yeah.
We have to believe that a better world is possible.
We do.
Even when it seems impossible.
And that's where I think Gutierrez's insights on the historical context of liberation theology are so powerful.
Right.
He reminds us that throughout history, oppressed people have found hope and strength in their faith. They've drawn on their religious traditions to fuel these struggles for liberation.
And he sees liberation theology as a continuation.
As a continuation.
That long tradition. A way of tapping into the power of faith to create a more just and compassionate world. It's like that famous quote from The Spiritual, we shall overcome. Right. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.
That's the kind of hope Gutierrez is talking about.
Yeah, it's a hope that's rooted in a deep faith and a belief in the power of collective action to create change.
And he reminds us, too, that this work of liberation is never finished. It's an ongoing process. It requires constant vigilance, courage, and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
He doesn't sugarcoat.
He doesn't.
No. But he also emphasizes the importance of hope. He draws on the work of theologians like Ernst Bloch, who saw hope as a revolutionary force, something that keeps us going even in the darkest of times.
So it's not just wishful thinking. No. It's about believing that another world is possible.
It is.
And then acting on that belief, even when it seems impossible.
Exactly.
This has been, I don't know, an incredible journey.
It has.
Exploring Gutierrez's, profound and challenging work.
It's a very rich text.
He's given us a lot to think about, a lot to wrestle with, and ultimately a lot to hope for.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. What final thought would you leave our listeners with as they kind of continue to grapple with these ideas?
I think Gutierrez, the most important message is this.
Okay.
Faith is not a spectator sport.
Okay.
It's a call to action.
Right.
A challenge to engage in the struggle for liberation, not just for ourselves, but for all of humanity.
So it's about putting our faith into practice.
It is.
Living out our beliefs in tangible ways and working to create a world where everyone can experience that fullness of life and dignity that God intends.
And he reminds us, too, that this work is never done.
Right.
It's an ongoing process, one that requires constant vigilance, courage, and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
Well, deep divers, we hope this exploration of theology of liberation has inspired you to dive deeper into these ideas, to wrestle with the challenges and to embrace the hope that Gutierrez offers. As always, keep diving deep. Keep asking questions and keep seeking truth and justice in all you do. We've covered so much ground already.
We have.
These 3 levels of liberation, this idea of encountering God in our interactions with others. I mean, it's clear that Gutierrez sees faith as something that should be lived out in the world, not confined to like private rituals or personal beliefs. But I'm curious, how does he address the role of the church as an institution? Does he believe it can truly be a force for liberation?
It's a question that he grapples with, I think, throughout the book.
Okay.
He acknowledges that the church has often been complicit in systems of oppression, more concerned with maintaining its own power and privilege than with serving the poor and marginalized.
He's pretty critical of that Christendom mentality is that we talked about earlier.
Right.
The idea that the church somehow exists apart from the world.
Separate,
focused solely on getting souls into heaven.
Exactly. He sees that as a real betrayal of the gospel message.
Yeah.
A distortion of Jesus' radical call to love and justice.
So how does he propose the church kind of reclaim this prophetic role?
Yeah.
What does a church that embodies liberation theology actually look like in practice?
Well, he uses this really powerful phrase, the church as a sacrament of liberation.
Sacrament of liberation. Okay.
Yeah, it's a dense concept.
Yeah.
But I think it boils down to this.
Okay.
The church, at its best, should be this visible sign and instrument of God liberating work in the world.
Yeah. So it's not just about preaching.
It's not just about preaching.
Message of liberation.
It's about embodying it.
Yeah, it's about embodying it.
In its structures, in its actions, in its relationships.
Right.
With those outside its walls.
It's about standing in solidarity with the oppressed, challenging systems of injustice, working to create a world where everyone has that opportunity to experience that fullness of life that God intends.
And it's a tall order.
It is.
Especially in a world where power and privilege are often so deeply entrenched.
Does Gutierrez offer any concrete examples of how the church can actually live this out?
He emphasizes the importance of prophetic denunciation.
Okay.
Of speaking truth to power.
So like the prophets of the Old Testament.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Calling out injustice. Challenging the status quo.
Yeah.
Even when it puts them at risk.
Even when it's dangerous or uncomfortable.
And he also stresses the need for the church to be a voice for the voiceless.
Okay.
Amplifying those stories and experiences of those who are often marginalized and ignored.
It's about moving beyond charity to solidarity. Not just giving handouts, but walking alongside those who are struggling and working together to create lasting change.
And Gutierrez reminds us too that this work of liberation is often a long and arduous process.
Right. There will be
setbacks, disappointments.
Yeah.
Even moments of despair.
He doesn't sugarcoat the challenges.
But he also emphasizes the importance of hope.
Right.
And he draws on the work of theologians like Ernst Bloch, who saw hope as this revolutionary force.
Okay.
Something that keeps us going even in the darkest of times.
It's not just wishful thinking.
It's not.
Right. It's about believing that another world is possible and then acting on that.
Yeah, acting on it.
Even when it seems impossible.
And
that's where I think Gutierrez's insights on this historical context of liberation theology become so powerful.
I agree.
He reminds us that throughout history, oppressed people have found strength and resilience in their faith.
Yes.
They've drawn on their religious traditions to fuel those struggles for liberation.
It's like that famous quote from the spiritual, "We shall overcome."
Yes.
Right. Yes. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.
That's the kind of hope Gutierrez is talking about, right? It's a hope that's rooted in a deep faith.
Yes.
And a belief in the power of collective action.
Collective action to create change.
To create change.
Yes.
This has been, an incredible journey.
It has been.
Exploring Gutierrez's, profound and challenging work.
Yeah, it's a very rich text.
He's given us a lot to think about.
Yes.
A lot to wrestle with.
Yeah.
And ultimately a lot to hope for.
A lot to hope for, yes.
What final thought would you leave our listeners with?
I think Gutierrez's most important message is this.
Yeah.
Faith is not a spectator sport.
Okay.
It's a call to action.
Right.
A challenge to engage in this struggle for liberation, not just for ourselves, but for all of humanity.
So it's about putting our faith into practice.
It is.
Living out our beliefs in intangible ways.
Intangible ways.
Working to create a world where everyone can experience that fullness of life and dignity that God intends.
And he reminds us, too, that this work is never done.
Right.
It's an ongoing process.
Yeah.
It requires that constant vigilance, courage, and a willingness to challenge the status quo.
Well, deep divers, we hope this exploration of a theology of liberation has inspired you to dive deeper into these ideas, to wrestle with the challenges, and to embrace that hope that Gutierrez offers. As always, keep diving deep.
Keep diving deep.
Keep asking those questions.
Yes.
And keep seeking truth and justice in all you do.